The TODO Group and partners helping in the creation of this survey launches the annual OSPO survey to analyze and keep track and keep a pulse on the status of the OSPO across different industries and sectors. So this year, we finally launched during Open Source Summit North America in Vancouver. The Japan community, the Open Source Japan community, part also of the OSPO local meetup and Open Chain local meetup community, has translated the survey in Japanese. So if you speak Japanese or you're based in Japan, you can take the survey in Japanese as well. OSPOlogy Live, Share and Learn. This time is going to be in Germany. This is brought to you by Open Source at SIP, and this will happen in Frankfurt in October from 10th to 11th. So registration is already open. For those unfamiliar with OSPOlogy, we try to bring different organizations, foundations, and projects. This is a collaborative effort with different communities, including Inner Source Commons, Chaos, OpenSSF, OpenChain, LF Energy, XPDX. There are representatives from these organizations helping in the organizing team. The TODO Group has one of the repos where in the past they had a OSPO definition, and we are working right now on a new release to improve and put it up to date. As many of you know, the term OSPO has been evolving a lot in the past years, and now it covers a wide variety of industries and sectors and needs to be updated. So this is a call for contributors. We submitted a PR, the community and different people are already giving great feedback on that. But you can also help us improve and contribute to the OSPO definition. And here are the different links where the community can go to the PR and leave their comments. Also, one of our working groups, the Career Path, we are restructuring again the meetings, and we are working to create an extension of the existing OSPO 101 free modules, and we started to define the personas and a draft of the modules that we would like to start working on. We stopped the meetings right now because we need to restructure. Usually this happens in European-friendly time zones, but I've heard that there's people also in Americas that wants to join, so we might need to change it to a different time zones to fit everyone's needs. And we also created like a new working group mailing list where people can actually subscribe and keep up to date on the evolution of this working group. And also, same as always, if you are new to OSPOlogy, we welcome you not only to watch these videos and watch these discussions, but also to contribute to the project. All these meetings are being recorded and uploaded in our OSPOlogy YouTube channel. And saying that, let's move now to the topic of the month. Today's topic is quite special. It's something that has been affected a lot of people. I think I'm speaking for everyone here that we are really concerned of that. We thought that this was a really important topic to make. From TODO, we have resources where people can post job offerings related to OSPOs. We do also have like an OSPO newsletter where we try to put the open positions during the month. You have someone or you know a specific position right now and you would like to share it, you can either use the chat, you can use the OSPO discussion forum link that I recently shared to share that, or even go into the Slack channel and share it there. So we will make sure to also help with the promotion and distribution of those job openings. I think the better way to introduce the panelists is asking the panelists themselves to really share maybe your role, and maybe also the question on if you have experienced or faced it in your organization, these layoffs or job freezes, and how have you experienced those? So we can maybe start with Georg.
Yeah, happy to start. Hello, everybody. My name is Georg Kunz. I'm in the OSPO of Ericsson, the telco company. And I'm in this job now for around about 2 years. But ever since I joined Ericsson, like a little bit of background, 10 years ago roughly, I've been doing open source work across various projects and communities and LF and open infra or OpenStack back in the days. So yeah, and then I gradually moved from being a contributor to doing a little bit more coordination work, looking into what should we do where, and how these kind of things, some might call it strategy, but really like, what should we do? How should we go about it? And then when we finally transitioned to have a proper OSPO as a function in Ericsson, I was really happy that I got on that job, basically on that team. We're a small team of 4 people right now. And transitioning to the topic of this OSPOlogy session, the original plans were to have a team of a slightly larger size, but for now, unfortunately, or let's say, fortunately, we didn't reduce the size, but we definitely ran into a freeze situation. So we need to see. The plans are still valid to grow the team once we have more certainty about the financial situation. But until now, or currently at least, we have to kind of work with what we have. So as I said, it's a fairly small team given the size of our R&D department, around about 30,000 people. So there are plenty of developers to take care of. But yeah, I like to do this. And now, and as you know, as Anna mentioned, I'm happy to be on the steering committee of the TODO group as well.
Thank you so much, Carol. I see next on my list, Sila, would you like to do the intro?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Anna. Hi, everyone. My name is Sheila Saibi. My pronouns are she, her. I've been leading the open source program office at Comcast officially since August of 2022. And before this role, I was doing technical program management on the same team with a focus on community developer relations, developer advocacy, and upstream community work. I'm based out of Silver Spring, Maryland, right between DC and Baltimore, Maryland. And I've been working in open source for almost a decade and in tech for almost 2. My journey in open source, like Georg, started with the OpenStack community, Open Infra, and my team is a small 5-person distributed and diverse team. We're globally distributed. And in terms of impact with layoffs, we haven't been impacted specifically directly with layoffs, but we have seen some challenges in terms of the team growing or hiring backfills.
I see Ananya next.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Ananya Malaku, and I am the program manager in the F5 OSPO. We are a fairly new team overall, with the team being created at the very end of 2021. And so I just hit my 1-year mark at F5, and we are a team of 3. So similar to Georg and Sheila, although we haven't had any reductions in the team, our growth has slowed down, and we are a new team overall. So we do have plans in the future to grow, but right now our team isn't expanding, and probably not this year. I've been working in open source program offices for about the past 5 years, where previously I was license compliance lead at Comcast with Sheila. And before that, I was a developer and interacted with open source as a user and came across some licensing questions where I ended up interacting with legal and evaluating open source licenses, which was my entry into open source and my awareness of compliance. And yeah, happy to be on the steering committee and enjoying the conversation with everyone. It's definitely an important conversation.
Thank you, Nani. Ashley?
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Wolf. I'm currently at GitHub, and I'm the director of our open source program office here. I just hit my 2-year anniversary, just came back a few weeks ago from parental leave, and all the news about layoffs and hiring freezes was taking place. I came to GitHub actually from the Yahoo and Verizon open source program office. For a number of years, almost a decade, I also have been involved in OSPOs, and I'd be banging on the door of GitHub asking us for help from things that we needed from the product and the platform. And the opportunity came up to interview, and I was super excited because I could be on the other side of the table, whereas in the to-do group meetings, we'd be begging folks at GitHub for help. Now I could be inside of the organization advocating for the needs of OSPOs. Our OSPO is twofold. We help staff, developers inside of the company be successful with open source, and we're hopefully building products and tools that help all of you be successful in your roles if you use GitHub. We haven't been directly impacted by the layoffs or freezes within the OSPO as of right now. I'm definitely seeing the effects across the OSPO community. At previous companies, I've been involved in large layoffs and can speak to that experience as well. And I'm happy to be a part of the conversation and help us to be able to sustain roles in open source programs and have this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And Thomas.
Hi all, I'm Thomas Timmerge. I am the head of open source program office at EPAM. Before I joined EPAM, I've been here now for just over a year. I ran the open source program office at Here Technologies since 2015, and I've been in open source for I think like 2 decades, 15 years plus. I keep losing track on when we started. It's something natural for me. Yeah, so I work with a lot of in my organization, and I work also a lot with other OSPOs, and we've definitely seen the impacts and the layoffs. In my own team, it was a temporary hiring freeze, and now a push to hire first from internally, but slowly, hopefully, I now see it recovering. But I definitely see a shift in what type of people are being hired and what type of roles. But at least it's slowly bouncing back on the European side.
So I have many questions actually. I don't know how to start. So you've been mentioning like all of you somehow has been noticing a change, at least in your organization. But do you know like what will be, or what do you think will be like right now the most critical threat in those people working in open source program offices in organizations? And why do you think this might be happening? Any thoughts? Also, feel free to raise the hand, so if someone wants to speak, we can keep track of that.
Sure. So some of the critical threads that are being discussed on the open source program office on our side are metrics and goal alignment. Those are really big critical threads for us, looking into the business goals and making sure that our outcomes and our goals are tied to the demands of the business is becoming more and more important for us, and documenting and creating tickets and putting in basically documenting all the work that we're doing and trying to display it in some sort of metrics or graph fashion so that we show our value, and also very, very critical to tie it to our business goals and to make sure that we're on top of those, and not just the overarching company goals, but also our organization goals, and making sure that there's some alignment there for our team.
And just, go ahead.
No,
so, good, Anna? Okay.
You're good.
Okay. Yeah, so I can add to that. Pretty much ditto to everything Sheila said. And I think that's a common thing across, open source program offices in general. I've seen that even the LF has a report on measuring the economic value of open source, and there's been many conversations in the industry, hallway conversations, to-do meetings and touchpoint calls about how do we show value, how do we show ROI, and it all goes back to metrics and aligning with business goals. So I think that's top of mind, especially now with the reduction in force that's been happening across the industry. It's like, how do we show our value to the company? How do we relate back to revenue? And that's a challenging thing to show because there's a lot of benefits of open source. It's well known. We're core to software, we're core to technology, but how do you show that metric to connect it all back? And that's a challenging thing to do. And even within our team, we're, as I mentioned, we're a brand new team, so we're building up the foundation, trying to get everything in place, and also trying to create that baseline of metrics to be able to tell that story. But we're very early on in our development.
And to add to that, I think security is top of mind for a lot of us right now. Compliance, how we look at license compliance, how we look at SBOM, supply chain security. So that definitely comes to mind as well.
Eric, and then Thomas?
Yeah, exactly. Just wanted to mention the supply chain security aspect because I think that's a specific challenge that requires, I think, a certain kind of thinking that you'll find very often in OSPO people because they have this open source background, right? It's a problem that is you can probably not really solve just by yourself within a company by just having the best processes, but because it spans different organizational boundaries, reaching from the open source domain to your own R&D, or through your own R&D to customers, it's very important to make everybody aware of what the expectations are, how to follow best practices, and so on. And this is where and solving many of these issues also right upstream, right? And this requires, I think, a lot of open source thinking. So one of the important things that I'm stressing why this requires OSPO knowledge. And a second aspect that might be, well, also of course a little bit trendy, that's the whole AI stuff. But when we have tons of discussions internally about that, and that's not necessarily only an open source question, but it ties into licensing questions, copyright questions, and so on. And again, that's competence that you find in OSPOs. So I think pointing to those upcoming, emerging, interesting challenges can really drive down the point that this kind of competence is needed.
Yeah, to add to Georg, I see that's the difference. What I see in different OSPOs when we had the layoffs, there's a lot. I look at there's different types of OSPOs, even different types of responsibilities. So we have on one side we have kind of like marketing OSPOs promoting like open source, and the other side we have the strict legal bad. But what I also see is from the layoffs, a lot of that, well, some of them made no sense whatsoever, where there were just ruthless layoffs across the whole OSPO. There was really no sense whatsoever. But on the other side, I just saw the marketing OSPOs heavily being affected because they were marketing. And the legal police, like the lowest tier, they were less impacted because, yeah, kind of legal is the last things that you're kind of fire. But now, as Georg said, with the whole new stream of topics like security and AI, what you now see with a lot of organizations is like, hang on, they're beginning to realize that this combination between business, technology, legal, and community, who can do that? Yes, they have maybe technology expert, they may have business expert, but who can move all across? And especially if I do a lot of talk now internally about AI and externally, this thing is moving so freaking rapidly, and it's understood by business leaders to be so freaking disruptive. How can you basically get under that wave? And especially now, if you see like even Google said that you don't delete the email, like there is no mode. Open source moves so fast. How do you get on the train? And that's where basically people are like, doing this distributed organization doesn't work. And that's where now the value of an OSPO is understood, but then still, how much is the investment? What is your ROI? It's all these typical questions. Ashley.
Yeah, and I just wanted to help with some framing of this. When we look at OSPO definition, the TODO group has this definition. There's a really neat mnemonic. I think Gil Yehuda added it, or folks in the TODO group. It's fear, love, money. When we look at maybe the categories of types of OSPOs, fear being risk mitigation, compliance, love is like we want to contribute more to open source, we want to attract more developers and hire for them, and those are some of the categories I think, Thomas, you were alluding to. And then for money, like how can we gain financial benefit from open source or some of the commercial activities? And so we did see some hits maybe more in the love category, but I think some things we can think about is how to tie in the value proposition when it comes to maybe the fear of losing the OSPO because they have such a critical role when it comes to compliance or framing conversations around emerging technology. So looking at that framework, I thought it might help us to bucket that a bit.
Yeah, I think Ashley, that is really interesting. In fact, I think that was from the old version of the and keeps and is still maintained in the new upcoming release that's still there. But I think it's interesting. I've also, so some of the things that I've been also hearing is like changing the kind of conversations, or maybe adding new conversations. That is what you were mentioning when addressing these challenges on the OSPO. Do you have any, or have you seen any best practices on how to start these conversations while also keeping in mind to the people, like for instance, this love part is important, and not only looking at the company side, but also like why it's important to take care of the open source community, on supporting them, on making the sustainability of those open source projects there, while also sharing the value of open source in that. Because I think also I've heard from other organizations where sometimes that part is not well understood, and it's hard to prove the value, but we shouldn't erase that part, because that is the sustain on all the conversation we might be having. So that cultural change, that cultural change in the mindset on the whole organization. Are there any best practices that you've been exploring or discussing in your organization or with the community? Yes, Sila?
Yeah, that's a great question, Anna. That's something we've been thinking about a lot lately. It's to come up with an inventory of all of the open source software that our business heavily relies on, and what's going to happen if that software is not sustained. It's going to impact the customer. And that story has been an easy one to tell for me with our leadership, because we pull up the list and we say, hey, look, we've got X amount of applications using this particular software, and look, there's only 2 maintainers, and one of them might no longer be working at this company, and who knows if they're going to have time and resources to work on this project. What are we going to do? And so that's kind of been one of our strategies, is to come up with a list of everything we heavily rely on, and to bring that over to leadership and say, we need to do something.
I don't know if someone wants to add something to that, but I also seeing some questions from the community. So if if you feel confident, I can start say them out loud. So Surab asked, how can OSPOs focus on community health in the face of layoff and hiring freezes? I think that is really related with what you said, right? Oh, we have these 2 maintainers only. I don't know if you follow a specific metrics or process to see how many maintainers does a project have, and this kind of strategy to let the management know that this is an important matter. Yes, Anani?
Yes, I think for us, because we have such a prominent open source project, within F5 we have Nginx, and that's built on top of open source. Nginx is very prominent, and so there's a lot of awareness about that and management around the projects that we have. But going back to the community side and listening to those conversations, I've heard that folks their budgets are a lot smaller than they used to be, and so instead of just layoffs and freezes, folks are not able to sponsor projects that they're using as much, or have the memberships that they had before, or even travel to conferences anymore. So I think there may be some risk and reduction on support of projects that do need support, because companies don't have that excess money to help with that. So that might be an area of risk outside of us managing our own projects, but also giving back across the industry.
Good if I unmute. Okay, just to add to that, I think even though there may be a period of time where there are reductions in budget, it's an opportunity to consider long-term strategies when we're out of this dip. And so it is a time to think strategically about how we can better support the open source we all depend on, and maybe focus internally as much as possible on the health of open source that's maintained by staff. So one of the things we've been doing is building out similarly an inventory and looking to see that we have something we call durable ownership. We have active maintainers on those projects to look at if they're active or if they're inactive. Do we need to archive them? But also thinking critically about the future around sponsoring more open source.
Yeah, just wanted to add to that. Based on my experience, everything in open source is kind of at least midterm, if not a long-term investment. And that, of course, is a little challenging in times like these. But what was important to us to point to some good use cases and success stories that kind of showed that long-term investment pays off, and that kind of reducing investment with, let's say, too short-sighted horizon is not going to be beneficial. Yeah, just wanted to mention that. And of course, I also wanted to mention, yes, we're building also the inventory, or I think it's actually every company, every user of open source needs to do that. We try to also figure out not just what is actually the software we use, because that's basically a lot. How do we prioritize this? And that can be an equally complex exercise when you kind of look at how often is it used across the various products you have, what's the exposure, maybe the threat surface, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of a tedious exercise, but it needs to be done, I think, in order to build a reasonable priority list, because otherwise you have tens of thousands of open source dependencies, and where do you start really? So yeah, that's how we try to approach it.
I'm seeing a lot of activity on the chat. I think one interesting comment comes from Miguel that said, I think there is a misconception that an OSPO team is only there to build a program, policies, processes, and tools, and not to think of the OSPO providing a valuable ongoing governance function across many phases of the open source use and culture in an organization. What are your thoughts on that? I also wanted to address that this is really interesting, and for instance, in the OSPO definition, in the new release, we are trying to bring a more human side on the definition itself, and not focusing what is the people behind the OSPO and how is the OSPO, and we are addressing different issues. And Miguel, if you would like to contribute to that, the PR is open. We would really appreciate all your help here. I think it's important. And what are your thoughts on this question.
I'll jump in. So the piece that Nigel mentioned on culture, I think that's a good one. That's often, it's not the first thing I think of when I think of OSPOs, but it's a really good one because we do a lot of culture training, culture lead by example, and advocacy for inner source collaboration as well as open source collaboration. So I agree. Thank you, Nigel.
Also, another question from Abigail, and I think maybe other people might be facing the same issue as Abigail. An aspiring open source program manager interested in working in an OSPO. What are the skills that are looked out for in order to gain employment or be valuable in spite of layoffs in these fields? So, any recommendations for Abigail? Yes, Ananya?
Yeah, so I'll answer the previous question and this one also. So on culture, I needed a second because again, that's not one of the top things that we think about, but it's something that we are actively doing. And for me, I'm 1 year in at this company, and historically we were a hardware company. And we've been going through a digital transformation to switch from being hardware-led to being SaaS-led. And it's been a very quick transformation with several acquisitions. And so we have, different pockets of the company that are more experienced with open source and some that are newer and have been historically on the hardware side. And so we are doing that culture transformation. We're building up community internally where, as soon as I joined the company, we're building up that internal community, a space for folks to connect with each other, talk about open source, share information, education programs. We have an ambassador program. So we're working on tooling to help with contributions and tracking and all of that. So all of that ties back into community and culture. And to answer the second question on different skill sets for OSPOs, we are a center of excellence. We interact with all pockets of the company. So I work with marketing and branding. We work with legal, security, engineering and product, learning and development, and the list goes on and on. I actually added the stakeholder section to the OSPO mind map. So you could see the list of stakeholders, but it's across the board. And so because we have all those different touch points, we also do a lot of comms and marketing internally ourselves. And so I don't think there's just one skill. And it goes back to what Tomas said about, what is the focus of your OSPO? Are you doing more, community building? Are you more focused on security and compliance within that OSPO? And the focus of the OSPO will lean more towards what skill set is required for that. But the opportunities are endless, and it just depends on which company will match the skill set that you have. So that's not a full answer, but it's, there's lots of different skills that would be valuable within an OSPO.
Yes, Thomas?
Yes, so generally for a program manager, is that there are some basics program management skills, but I have seen that basically the good OSPO leaders, they generally look at the personal skills of the person, and then everything that's missing will help you get there. It's generally, and the OSPO community is very, very friendly. So I've had people that I've mentored even across other companies, just because I feel like, that person can make the next change. And for us, it's all about the next generation. Again, we care about the open source community. So just a tip, like if you want to know something, if you read something, just reach out to the person. You'll be surprised how friendly most of them are, and will actually either give you the answer that you're looking for, or refer you like, hey, you need to probably talk to this person, or have you known this YouTube video or this webinar. Actually very, very friendly and in a community as a whole, and said like, they're looking some basic skills as a program manager. Yes, I'm actually now helping somebody become a program manager directly. There are some trainings from LF that you can basically that help to show you that you have some basic certifications. But most of the community stuff, the compliance stuff, it's all things that you will just learn hands-on on the job. And you just basically generally, at least for me, I'm looking at people that are open-minded and kind of a jack of all trades. That again, we have to move between so many different units and functions. I'm looking usually for flexible people that are willing to learn.
And program manager is just one role within an OSPO. There can be a ton of different types of roles, from compliance to engineering, program managers, comms. It really depends on the nature of the OSPO. But to Thomas's point, like how I got involved with an OSPO is I saw people online talking about it through Quora, like representing their company, giving code away for free. And I thought, wow, that's a job that people have. And I reached out to learn more about that profession. So mentorship is huge there. Agree, the network and community is very open. We have a Slack channel in the To-Do group Slack space for mentorship. I'd love to see that grow more. That's probably an area within the steering committee we could help to tend to, but would love to help in that space if there's any suggestions from others.
And I have one last thing to add. Yes to everything everyone said so far, and adaptability as well. Open source software and communities move quickly, and it's impossible for us to stay on top of everything all the time. So willing to collaborate with others and be adaptable so that when changes happen, you're able to quickly pivot and move to the next thing.
Okay, so we only have 1 minute left. So to wrap up, I just wanted to give a short summary on what we have been discussing. So the need of maybe include all the conversations within the OSPOverse with the organizations on the new trends and topics across security, cybersecurity, AI, even cloud native related technologies, and how open source and thus the OSPO plays a critical role there, maybe having that conversations more in depth, ways to effectively speak the language across all the teams. I know you directly didn't say that, but I think with this idea of community and collaboration, I think it's also involving within the organization and this culture and how to speak that language through maybe the data, because it's a global language and metrics, but also avoiding maybe the technical jargon that sometimes in open source we tend to use might be another thing. I think I'm not missing anything. Oh, and the power of community, on how this high-speed, constant changing environment forces us to be engaging with communities and keep up to the latest trends. I think it's also a really important topic. To end up with, I don't know if you would like to give maybe short, finishing with, I don't know, how you see the open source program offices and open source related roles within organizations evolving in the next months or years. Do you have short thoughts on that?
I can start us off. One thing I did want to say is, in terms of what can we all be doing to help, I think it's a great start, this conversation, to help validate the existence of OSPOs. We're all most likely member companies of the Linux Foundation, some of us in the steering committee and some of you on the call. I think we can lean in more on organizations and foundations, especially ones that have companies that are members, to help us to send a message that OSPOs are important across the business, so that when these conversations are taking place about, hey, we're looking inside of an organization and which groups need to go, OSPOs are seen as valuable. When we look at fear, we don't want to see the group that's focused on compliance and helping reduce risk go, or that groups that are tied to product or that are helping to save the company money. So maybe we can lean in more to the LF and other organizations to help us, as inside of our organizations, we're advocating for OSPO across the board. And then in terms of looking forward and the role that OSPOs can play, I'm maybe a little biased, but I'm personally interested in how we can all better frame emerging technologies, whether that's generative AI, LLM investigations, all of that inside of our org and collaborators there with each other. So I'm very excited about that prospect and to see how we can all work together in that space. Thomas?
So looking forward, I'm at least hopeful, at least I see in Europe more OSPOs being formed, especially in governments. And now finally you're beginning to understand that hey, open source is something that we should be doing, and they're willing to invest it. So I'm based in Germany. The German government has made a fund worth several tens of millions to invest in open source. And slowly with new legislation, it's coming at OSPO will probably exist at all levels of government. So it's coming. We just need to work on having the government understanding of open source be better. And so slowly but surely is that the topic, even though open source is now more than 20 years old, it's now really shifting from being a tiny thing to being this is a way of working that is basically standard, but it's still not fully understood. So a lot of us in the community are trying to help this, but more and more OSPOs are, I see a bright future. Just for me, it's just a temporary dip, maybe for a couple of months, and then I basically see it bouncing back with all of the legislation and all of the discussions. I see it at least at EU and also US government level. It's coming back. If that train is just that I'm involved in with SBOM security and open source health, it's the train has left the station. It's only going faster and faster and faster, and it's more and more you see executives and government leaders like, hey, we need to do something here. But the problem there is they don't know the way from A to Z. And luckily, yeah, I said the foundations are slowly helping to say, like, actually there is a way, and OSPO may be one of the instruments to actually help you as an organization manage and deal with this phenomenon as open source.
Yeah, so I was going to say similar things to what Ashley and Tomas said. One, on the emerging technology front and the speed at which technology grows in general. Open source is core to technology. And for us to be able to grow and keep up with the speed at which things are moving, you have to turn to open source. Otherwise, you're going to fall behind if you're not leveraging it, contributing and participating in the community. And so I think with that's been happening, and the security vulnerabilities and awareness that's also happening in the community, and then also the wake-up call from governments and universities joining the conversation. We now have more awareness across the board. We have more OSPOs popping up in different spaces within different technology sectors, different industries, universities, governments. And so just within the time that I've been a part of an OSPO, I've seen this dramatic change, where when I was license compliance lead, people are like, licenses, what's that? Back then, OpenChain had their specification, and they have a specification for license compliance, and they released an ISO standard, and now there's a security ISO standard related to that. And then there's a White House directive related to SBOMs and security. And so the things that have been happening in the industry have been showing the importance of open source, and that it's just moving on from here. It's not slowing down, it's not going away. OSPOs are important, and we're needed to help, realize the value of open source, to help guide the company within the industry and through communities, to help build standards and collaborate across the board, so for us to be able to keep up in general.
Thank you. Sila, Georg, I know we're already out of time, but if you have any final words.
Yeah, being mindful of the time, I basically just plus one everything that has been said before. Very much agree. It's not going to go away. The demand for our competence will be there. So, yeah. Okay.
Sila, any last words, or also plus one?
Yeah, plus one to everything everyone said. I couldn't have said it better.
All right, so saying that, thank you so much for staying until the end. People have been also putting all their questions in the OSPO discussions in case you want to keep up the conversation async. And for people that might watch this recording video in the future, they can also follow up in the related OSPO discussion. So saying that, again, thank you, Nania, thank you, Georg, Thomas, Ashley, Sheila, for this great conversation, for being here. And thank you all attendees that has been staying on the end and asking these great questions. And saying that, I'll see you in the next OSPOlogy meeting that actually is going to be next month, but this is going to be in a different time zone, and it's going to be about the OSPO journey of Ant Group, that is a large Chinese company that recently started the OSPO and share their best practices on the journey. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and see you in the next OSPOlogy meeting. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Bye.